There are now large groups of Cuban police patrolling the capital after nationwide protests over food, fuel, and medicine shortages, which has also created higher prices. The country in the midst of an economic crisis made worse by the pandemic and U.S. sanctions. Protesters chanted freedom and called for Cuba's president to step down. He's now blaming Cuban Americans on social media for stirring up yesterday's demonstrations. And with an internet outage on the island country, the Cuban community here in Northeast Ohio is struggling to find out what is going on there. In this News 5 original, Caroline Sweeney spoke with two men who can only watch what's happening in their home country.
They're saying we've had enough.
This is what Cuba sounded like on Sunday. And this
Yo soy un hombre sincero.
Is what Cuba sounds like to Justo Sabarit. Sabarit and his family were refugees in 1970. He calls Old Brooklyn home now, but he still has family on the island, only 90 miles from Miami.
This is probably the worst it's been. They don't have enough to eat.
Sabarit sees the protests and knows
it's absolutely a big deal. Right now, because they're very controlled. It's a very controlled environment.
Cuba is a communist country which spent nearly 50 years under the leadership of Fidel Castro. These protests started over food shortages and high prices during the pandemic.
It's throughout all the provinces. It's throughout the entire country that I think people are just saying we've had enough and we need to have change.
The Cuban community in Northeast Ohio is smaller than other groups from Latin American countries, but that means Cubans here are connected. This may be what Cuba sounds like to Justo. But this is what Cuba sounds like to Augusto Bordalois.
This is what they have to do. They have to protest.
Bordalois left Cuba in 1999 to teach at Cleveland State. He saw the protests a few years before. The teacher and artist knows nothing is as simple as it seems on the island.
It is hard for me from here just to figure out what it is.
There is an internet blackout. His father and family send updates. Bordalois says Sunday was different from the early 90s.
It was not an uprising, it was people complaining.
But he's worried for Cuba if it continues to sound less like his paintbrush and more like the protests. Caroline Sweeney, News 5.
All right, thank you, Caroline. And while Cuba's president is blaming U.S. sanctions for the power outages and limited food and medical supplies, President Biden says his administration stands with Cubans' call for freedom and relief from the tragic grip of the pandemic and decades of repression and economic suffering.